Okay, so how are you all doing? Everything okay? Any just preliminary questions before we get started?
I had a question, but it was in regards to the paper that's due tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, I can go ahead and answer that now.
The only question I had is, I know it says there could be a speech or an interview.
Uh-huh.
I found an interview. I just don't know. It's like a 9-minute interview. Would you say that's like enough content? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it can be as long or as short as you want, as long as you think you have enough to write about.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. That was my only question.
Okay, perfect.
And to real quick, just to elaborate on what she said,
Mhm.
basically it's just any of the modules and any of the discussions that we had through there to be like the main topics. If we want to do ideographs or ideology or invitational rhetoric or some
Yeah.
of the stuff prior to that.
Yeah, so any of those, just choose one of them to be the
Okay.
theory that you talk about. I mean, every once in a while, someone chooses like a couple, and then I'm not getting the depth that I need. So make sure you're choosing.
Okay. And then last time I remember you told me just try and be more detailed on, more in depth on the speech
Uh-huh.
than the actual, what the actual topic is about, I guess, or how it applies.
So your description, or like I guess the connection you're making to the example, that section should be a little bit longer than your theory, the summary of the theory section.
Okay. And does it have to be in regards to politics? The speech should be, I mean, given the name of the class,
I mean, for this one, it would be nice if it was, but
Okay.
for this assignment, the most important thing is I'm seeing that you're getting those difficult theories that we started with down. So as long as you're doing that, that's what I'm looking for.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. The next one will be more focused in on like a debate, so it will have to be political.
Okay.
Okay. Elizabeth, did you have a question?
No. I think my computer just made a sound.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sometimes your screens come up and I'm like, oh, I don't know what's happening. Okay. Yanan, did you have any questions about the paper?
No, thank you, Professor.
Okay, perfect. Well, in that case, let's go ahead and get started with the reading today. Unless any of you have any other logistical questions.
I'm good.
No.
Okay, cool. Just double checking. Okay, so today's reading, we're finally moving from talking about just theory, and we're going to start talking about things like application of some of the theories. So today will be our first reading where we're actually getting into some examples from, I guess, sort of recent, but still throughout history. I'm going to get this slide ready to go here, share it with you all. So in today's reading, it's written by Kathleen Jamieson. She's a pretty well-known political communications scholar. So yeah, she's a pretty big name, even though I'm sure nobody's talked about it in any other rhetoric class. Today's discussion is going to start with us talking about Aristotle's 3 types of speeches. That's something that you already had to answer in your reading comprehension question. Then we'll talk about the author's opinions of some of Obama's speeches that she talks about. And then finally, we will watch just a couple of clips of Trump speaking so that I can give you a chance to see how this applies to what's going on today. So we won't watch long clips, but we'll watch just a little bit. Sound good?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and get started by just reviewing these types of speeches. So you may or may not gone over these types of speeches in like a rhetorical theory class. But I'm going to ask you, do either of you remember what a forensic speech is? Any of you?
It's I actually Googled it the other day too. I think it was more of judiciary or on the past.
Yeah, exactly. So a forensic speech is anything on the past. It's typically in like a courtroom. That's where you almost always see a forensic speech. And I had you answer, like, why did she only choose epideictic and deliberative? The reason behind that is because we don't usually see a president talking about whether something had gone on in the past or not. So the only time we would see a president do that is if they're getting accused of something or their administration is getting accused of something. So we actually, right now with what's going on with the Trump administration, we might see him give forensic speeches, but typically that is not something we see from the president. Does that make sense?
So real quick, one question on that. So I know in the reading they talked about the Tucson shooting or whatever. That's not considered a forensic speech though, even though it's about something in the past, or is it because the main focus of the speech was about how we're going to go forward or whatever is going on now, kind of?
So the main focus of that speech was to honor what was happening at that moment. Even though it was about something that had happened very recently in the past, it wasn't about like whether this had happened or not, or how this had happened.
Okay.
And that's what a forensic speech is about. It's about trying to figure out what had actually happened in the past. Make sense?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, cool. So then epideictic, this one is the ceremonial speech. You probably heard about this as ceremonial in your like a public speaking course or something, because epideictic is sort of a weird word. So think about this as something to honor or recognize that something has happened, or that you know, a celebration of a person. So these are things like eulogies, graduation speeches, like commencement speeches. All of those are epideictic. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then finally, anyone want to try to tell me what deliberative is? You want to give that one a go? So we said forensics is about the past, right? Epideictic is about what's right now, right? What do you think deliberative is?
The future? Or
Yeah. I mean, a generic way of thinking about this is like, it typically is talking about what will be coming up. And more specifically, this is trying to elicit a response from the audience. So this will be something like you're trying, this will have something that's even more persuasive than something like an epideictic speech, where epideictic is like, this is what's happening now. I'm not trying to argue that we should be doing anything in the future. Deliberative is like, actually, we need to fix this problem right now. And even though they might be talking about that moment, they're really talking about like what's going to be coming in the immediate future about fixing that particular moment.
Now is deliberative, are those more like the speeches that we'd see on like, say, the campaign trail or like along those lines, or it could be a mix? I mean, I get.
Yeah. So one of the main things that Jameson is trying to do, and this is one of your reading comprehension questions, she is trying to get the readers to think about when is appropriate to give an epideictic speech and when is appropriate to give a deliberative speech. And so I would say typically if you're campaigning, you're giving a deliberative speech, but the times when that might not happen is if there's some sort of tragedy or like a natural disaster, where most people would find it problematic if someone was campaigning despite the fact that there's a natural disaster, right? So epideictic would be more appropriate. You could just say, this is something that's happening. I feel for the people who are affected by this, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
And which one is easy to remember?
Which one
for
is
audience? Yeah.
Do you mean like
Like memorable?
I would say that depends as well. It has a lot to do with, I mean, first of all, it has a lot to do with if the audience cares about the person or the thing that's being remembered for epideictic, right? Mm-hmm. So if a president has passed away, people might always remember the speech that was given by the vice president, right? Because that's something that, because of the context, will make you want to remember that. And deliberative, I mean, again, this really just has to do with like if something major is said there or they do something that's surprising, then that will make them remember it. But I don't think that there's one or the other that becomes more memorable.
Okay. So the deliberative is the something disaster happens.
Something, could you say that again?
Something disaster.
Oh yeah, like a disaster?
Yeah.
You could do it, so you would probably do an epideictic, for a disaster, because you would want to say, this is what happened.
Yeah, this what happened.
Yeah.
And
so
what we do in the future, right? Like rebuild or something.
Yeah, deliberative would be like, we need to rebuild after this disaster. So maybe like 3 days after the disaster happened, it might be more appropriate to give a deliberative speech.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. This will actually make more sense because the examples that she's giving us will help us sort of see what I mean by like the context is really important on when you choose this and how it becomes memorable and all of that stuff. So as long as you have a working foundation for what these things are, we can move forward and start talking about some of the reading. Do you feel like you have at least some understanding? Okay. Okay, cool. Well, let's go ahead and dig in. Don't worry about this one. That's what we typically do in our classes, but in our face-to-face classes. But since you're here, we're just going to do this together. So first of all, the way that this author starts out is she talks about how when President Obama was elected, his speech accepting the nomination was a speech that united everyone. All right, so it brought everyone together, no matter if they were Democrats, Republicans. In the speech, he says things like black, white, straight, gay. He's saying all of these things that make us feel like we are united, right? So that becomes really powerful. And she's saying that's what needs to happen in a speech, recognizing that you are about to be the president. It needs to be something that is not deliberative, and something that is more epidictic, saying this is what's happening. Does that make sense so far?
Like making a more profound statement that this is the path that we're going to take versus the hope or the dreams or.
Exactly, yeah. Like he's not trying to say, okay, now we need to build right now. He's just saying, this is what happened. We've been brought together.
Okay.
And what she has argued after that speech is that, okay, he did a good job there, but then after that, he sort of started failing when he became president. All right, so she liked the one where he was accepting that he was president. But after that, starting with the inaugural speech, she's pointed out a lot of different ways that he has failed based on things like context and gestures and the use of the words that he's chosen or not chosen.
Real quick, so wait, the initial speech in the reading, so he did that correctly because he was stating what was going to happen. I might have confused myself with what I had said and what you had said.
Yeah, so the first speech, and this is the one that she talks about very briefly in the introduction. Yeah. He did it correctly because he made it epidictic like it was supposed to be.
Okay.
So he wasn't talking about like it's this or that. But very soon after that, he gave a speech right before his inaugural speech. I don't have the date. I don't remember the date, but it was a few days, so sometime in January. And it was a few days before his inaugural speech. And what happened there was he started talking to only his voters. Mm-hmm. And that particular speech, he started to become more deliberative. And she says, especially for a new president, this isn't what we're looking for. Right? We need the new president to start off, she's sort of like saying we need the new president to start off soft. Because if he starts off strong, he's going to divide automatically.
Okay, so not as much as setting the tone, but like doing it in a mean that's where everybody could kind of, doesn't really have a clear choice of taking left or right. It's kind of like, you're going to have to wait to see where it goes. Exactly.
So that way, at least he's starting on this platform of we are all it's not even we're working, we are all together. It's not even about we're working together. We're just here together. We are united, and let's see what happens. Are Yanan and Elizabeth, you following me?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question, Professor.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Have you heard some president
mm-hmm.
will do the NLP while they are speaking?
When they do, could you say that? When they do what when they're speaking?
NLP, neuro linguistic program.
Oh, would I
Oh
say
yeah,
that they train themselves in that way? Is that what
yeah.
you're?
Because I hear that like the
Mm-hmm.
Kennington, they have a group of the NLP professors
Mm-hmm.
to teach him how to do some body language to influence people's emotion and like you know the influence of body language and the words can totally persuade people.
Yes, for sure. And this is something, I mean, this is one of the reasons that Jameson is pointing out some of the things that Obama does throughout some of these speeches, because
Mm-hmm.
despite being trained in all of these ways, and he's every single president who runs, even people who don't win, are trained very, very well. They sometimes slip up. And
Oh,
she's showing us, like, President Obama set this precedent that, like, he was an amazing speaker.
Yeah.
Right? When he was
yeah.
running, before he became president, and this is, not me like saying he's an amazing person, he's an amazing president. He was just a good speaker.
Oh,
Um, and when he came into office, she's saying, like, all of this training, like, it seemed like it just disappeared. It seemed like you knew how to connect with people until you became president.
Which I think you like going back to that previous statement, like a lot of people said, like obviously there was a context, when he was running up to election, a lot of people voted for him because of his color of his skin, which, but a lot of people were like, oh, he's just a really good talker,
Yeah.
But I think even though, like, when I read this and I found like that was really interesting, was like, I'm obviously Obama stands out in a lot of our minds because it's still fresh, but I was like, you don't really read, it's still very hard to decipher a lot of what she put in there if you're just an average human being, like watching that stuff, and I find it very unique.
Yeah, for sure. And this is why we won't watch all the videos that she's given us. I would encourage you, if you want to know more, like the things that she's looking at, watch those videos. I'll show you one of the videos in just a second. But it really helps to go back and like see them. And you might even find that you disagree with her. That's something that what's interesting when you read these types of like sort of subjective presentations is that, like, if you watch the entire inaugural speech, she's saying, this is a main argument that she's saying, he did not offer a digestive statement for the audience to leave with. In other words, he left them nothing to remember, right? If I watch that speech on my own, I actually see some things that could have been classified, in her opinion, as a digestive statement. But so I think what's important here is, if you watch it on your own, think about what she's saying and then see if you can find something like, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, right? That's one of her examples of a digestible statement. It can be really nice to say, actually, like, I see where you're coming from, but I don't agree. Right. And I think it would be different, like, if we study this 10 years from now, we might remember different things. Okay, I want us to move forward. I like where we're going so far, but questions or comments before we continue so we can watch some of these clips?
No.
Okay.
no.
All right. So the inaugural speech, her main argument, just no digestible statement. The next one that she talks about is the BP oil spill, right? And for those of you who don't remember this happening, this was a pretty big crisis. But what happened initially was that, I mean, I remember being confused as to whether it was a big crisis or not, right? And one of her major issues with this speech is that he waited until like 50 days or more to give this speech, right? This was a huge natural disaster, and he waited 50 days. And he gave the speech in the Oval Office. So for her, a few problems. Him waiting 50 days showed that he didn't care as much about the environment as he had promised in the deliberative speeches that he gave when he was campaigning, right? So he sort of, something she talks about is like, he failed to live up to expectations in this response, right? The other thing is the fact that he waited 50 days and then just gave it in the Oval Office also is problematic, because the Oval Office signals this is a big deal. right? I think they chose it because it gives you the idea that there's a big deal. But she's saying, well, you waited 50 days. How big of a deal is this? If you waited this long, you probably could have gone to the site, right? And made it seem like this was more of a big deal than just, okay, it's 50 days later, I'm going to give this really good speech. Right? Are you all following me so far?
Yeah.
So do you remember if she said this speech was epideictic or deliberative? Or even based on what I've said, do you think it was epideictic or deliberative?
I think that it did neither,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it was like now I might be getting mixed up, but it didn't focus solely on the purpose of the speech, or I might be thinking of the Tucson speech.
Yeah, well, so I would say, I think she said it's more epideictic, or if she didn't come out and say epideictic, what's happening here is that he is saying that this happened, but he's not saying what he's going to do about it.
Okay, that's what it was, yeah.
And what she's more straightforward with is she wants this speech to be more deliberative. She actually thinks that he should have taken the time to, say, this is why we need to be concerned about drilling for oil off the coast of the United States. And she should have said she said that he should have said that Congress needs to act on this issue right now. Right. So that's her opinion. I mean, my argument would be if he did that, I think he would get a lot of slack because he's choosing to be political in a time of national crisis. So I have a feeling that she would have a problem if he did become more deliberative, but I understand what she's trying to say here. Does this make sense to all of you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Let's do one more and then we'll try to watch a video. Actually, I have a video of this one. I have it pulled up. So the next one she talks about is a eulogy in Tucson. While I'm pulling this up, do any of you remember what this eulogy is for?
Wasn't some kind of judge or something like that? That got shot? Was it?
Yeah. So a congresswoman had gotten shot. I'm pulling up the video, so sorry, this is gonna go away for a second. A congresswoman had gotten shot, and what was happening? Let me see here. Sorry, I clearly can't do two things at once here. And 4 people died, and the congresswoman almost died as well. She, in fact, it was announced that she was dead, and then they actually announced that she wasn't dead. So she was hanging on for dear life at that point. So after this happened, he decided to go to Tucson and give a speech. I'm just going to play about a minute because you're going to get the vibe that she's giving you as far as what went wrong in this speech. Okay, so hopefully you can hear this. Let me know if you can't. Can you hear it?
To
Yes.
the families
Okay.
of those we've lost. To all who call them friends. To the students of this university, the public servants who are gathered here, the people of Tucson, and the people of Arizona. I have come here tonight as an American who, like all Americans, kneels to pray with you today and will stand by you tomorrow.
All right, so I'm going to stop here because if you might have heard it, you might not have heard it, but she says his words are very beautiful, right? The speech is written wonderfully, but there's a problem with the way that the place that he chose. Does anyone remember what the problem was, or can you hear it?
Was it the crowd?
Yeah. So she's saying, so they chose to give this speech in a huge stadium. And the obvious reason is there's going to be a bunch of people who wants to see the president. So why don't we use a stadium instead of going to a place where people are going to be lined up outside? Right. So it makes sense. But the issue becomes this what is supposed to be an epidictic speech is being received in a way that almost sounds deliberative. Right. So he's not giving us the vibe of a deliberative speech, but the audience is giving us that vibe. And that makes it so that the speech isn't really as effective as it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
Adding to that, if you watch the rest of the speech, you'll see that the flow that he has, when it's typically pretty good, because as Yemen said, they're very well trained. The flow that he has is disrupted because it almost seems like he didn't expect people to respond with all of the applause. Like, he has to stop for the applause, and it's almost like, oh, like, I didn't practice for this. I didn't think that this would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for her, this is what could have been a really beautiful speech and a really important moment in his presidency. It's just sort of a letdown again. Any comments or concerns about this one?
No, so is this like where she talks about like the staging of the speech?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, like, so.
Or the setting, I guess.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So she's trying to tell us, and I mean, this is sort of getting into dramatism, but remember, she's working with like classical rhetoric. So she's trying to tell us the choice that you make about where you give these presentations can disrupt what you're trying to do.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
No.
Okay. Instead of like going back and forth, because I do have one more video I want us to watch, I will, let's see, we have one more speech that we need to talk about as far as Obama, and then we're going to watch a Trump speech. So we're almost done. The last one that she talks about is when we had an S&P ranking that went down from AAA to AA+. This is something that most people, unless you're in economics, I still don't really understand why it was a big deal. I just know it affected the economy. And what was happening was people were just panicking. And what happened was Obama got on the news and decided to give like a really short speech and say, you know, this is no big deal. Like Warren Buffett, who is an expert economist, says it's going to be fine and don't worry. And then he, at the end of the speech, shifts and starts talking about the war in Afghanistan. So what she says about this speech is, why give a speech if you don't want to give a speech? It seems like if you watch the speech, it seems like he looks like he's bothered about having to show up and talk about this.
Right, I remember.
Yeah, and the way that he's presenting it sort of seems very rushed, and it's not as polished, which of course, like, it probably was rushed, but he's a really good speaker. And why would in this particular case, when people were panicking about the economy, why would he make it appear this way, right? So, and also don't tack on this whole other thing that could have been a separate news conference.
Right.
Like that just makes it so that neither one of them seem important. Do any of you remember what she says he could have done instead?
Was it that he waited till the following Monday, or did he give the speech on the Friday or the Monday? Because that's where I was thinking, like, why didn't he give the speech on the Friday and then he let the whole weekend go through and then Monday it happened?
Yeah, so he gave the speech on the Monday.
Yeah.
And this is, again, sort of getting back to what she was saying before about the oil spill. Like, if you're going to give something that's rushed, it should really be rushed, right? Like, you had 3 days to prepare for this.
Right.
Oh, she said that that he should have gone, if he was going to do the speech, that he should have had like that committee that he said he was going to put together and kind of make it a more of a team effort and show that there was going to be something that was going forward, vice kind of like a,
exactly,
that was more reassuring, other than like, oh, this is, it's fine.
Exactly. Yeah, like the speech he gave was somewhat deliberative, right? We knew he was going to do something, but it was pretty vague. So it would have been, according to her, more effective to actually not give a speech and show up with the committee, so that then the headlines in the news could do the deliberation for him. In other words, say they're getting to work on this. that would have made people feel more confident about what was happening than his very rushed speech that didn't really make any sense. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So the last thing that I want us to do is I want us to sort of practice all the stuff that we've thought about as far as Jameson and what she was talking about, right? So things like timing, context, setting, the way you're delivering a speech. All of those things are affecting whether people read this as a good or bad speech. And I want us to watch Trump's speech after the Charlottesville, attack. For those of you who don't remember what was happening in Charlottesville, there was a white nationalist group who was sort of doing, a unity march around some of the statues there that people wanted to tear down. And so they had white nationalists there, and they had like Black Lives Matter protesters at the same time. And there was a clash between the protesters, multiple clashes. One of the things that happened is a man ran over a young woman. So a white nationalist protester ran over a young woman from the Black Lives Matter, and ran over other people, but the young woman died. Mm-hmm. So if you don't remember this, it took a little while for Trump to respond, but he responded over a weekend, and I want us to watch that response, just a couple of minutes of it, so you can see if you can make any connections here. All right, so let's see.
This was a small press conference, but a very important one, and it was scheduled to talk about the great things that we're doing with the Secretary on the Veterans Administration, and we will talk about that very much so in a little while, but I thought I should put out a comment as to what's going on in Charlottesville. So again, I want to thank everybody for being here. In particular, I want to thank our incredible veterans, and thank you, fellas. Let me shake your hand. Great people. They're great people. But we're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. It's been going on for a long, long time. It has no place in America. What is vital now is a swift restoration of law and order and the protection of innocent lives. No citizen should ever fear for their safety and security in our society. And no child should ever be afraid to go outside and play or be with their parents.
All right, we're just going to stop there because you're getting at least some of what I want you to get here. So if you were going to step into the shoes of Jameson, based on how she evaluated Obama, what might be some things that you might say with those 2 minutes that you just saw? Do you think she would like it, or she wouldn't like it so much?
I don't think so.
What do you think she wouldn't like about it?
Well, I mean, we didn't see all of it, but I don't really know where he's going with the speech. Mm-hmm. He's just saying, I guess, obvious things, but I guess because would this be epidietic? Is that how you say it?
Yes, yeah. So it seems it at least should be epidictic.
Okay.
Right. I would say that there's a little bit of a deliberative vibe from the way that he seems like he wants to alleviate the blame off of him and President Obama. Right. Mm-hmm. Sort of saying, it's not my fault. It's somebody else's fault. Right. And so I think that, to me, that gives me a vibe of like, oh, we're starting to fight about this, and I don't know if I'm ready to fight about this yet.
Yeah, I think he kind of the way he led into it too was kind of like, okay, well, you know, I have to say this. And then on top of that, kind of looked like it was manuscripted, that like he kind of like, he's just reading off the paper. And then, you know, before he said that, you know, he put the veterans first again, you know, kind of went back to them. And then he didn't even like really like if I watched that not knowing what had priorly I wouldn't have known, like, okay, so what are we talking about here? You know, somebody run over kids playing in the street, they like, you know, somebody reckless driving in a neighborhood. It wasn't really so much of on, he didn't really, I don't even think he used the word race or, you know, clash between dividing lines or, you know, any of that. So that, I think she would probably, you know, knock on that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, especially with the way that Trump was known and still is known to be a speaker who's pretty like animated, right? And so remember, she said that Obama, we had some expectations about the way Obama presented himself, right? When he looked like he was reading or he looked like he was bothered, that made the speech ineffective. Here, Trump looks like he's bothered in a different way than Obama did, right? He looks like he's reading, and typically it doesn't seem like he even uses teleprompters most of the time.
Yeah.
Right? And so it made it, because of the way that we expected him to come out and do a speech, it made it seem less genuine because he's doing something different. Right. And again, I'm not getting at like political differences, right? I'm more getting at like what he is doing with the way he's presenting and the way that he started with the veterans, which is, of course, like honoring the veterans is really important. But at this moment, he was supposed to be trying to give some time to this thing that had just happened. And so I think, as Joe was saying, that like distraction became really problematic, and you should give both of them equal focus.
Now, do the majority of these like speeches that the presidents give and like at least that are you know, the more popular ones that we see on TV, you know, not so much the rally speeches or stuff like that, but the ones that are they always like somebody's just handwriting them for him, like somebody else is doing this, and then like do they sign off on it? Or I mean
it probably depends on how fast they had to come up with it, but I would say sometimes they don't even know what they wrote, right?
Okay.
Like, and which is why like a speech writer, like you have to trust, they're like one of the most trusted people in the business, right? Like when you find that good speechwriter, you don't want to let them go because you just know that whatever they come up with is going to be golden.
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, some of you could become speechwriters. Probably get paid the big bucks. I don't know. All right. So the point here is make sure that you are always considering context, expectations, timing, all of that fun stuff that we talk about in rhetoric all the time, but Jameson really pointed out pretty well throughout Obama's first couple of years. Okay. Cool. Well, that's all I have. This one went sort of long, but we still got we went in the 45-minute time frame. So thank you so much. And as always, if you have questions, I'm happy to either stick around or you can always email me.
Okay. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You
You
too.
too. Bye.
You too.